Vivian and Shania exchanged a glance, their bodies tensing. Their hatred for Lara ran deep, but something primal, something instinctual, forced them to act. It was useless. A sickening crack echoed through the blood-stained pit as Lara's head twisted at an unnatural angle, her lifeless body crumpling like a discarded doll. Her killer, a towering brute with arms like tree trunks, stood over her, his cold, dead eyes sweeping the carnage around him. From the balcony above, a massive machete was hurled toward him. The gleaming blade spun in the air, catching the torchlight like a predator's eye. He snatched it effortlessly, his grip as steady as a seasoned butcher about to carve fresh meat. The crowd roared in approval. But before he could revel in the moment, betrayal struck like a dagger in the dark. His own comrades, their faces twisted with greed and desperation, lunged at him, clawing for the weapon. The pit descended into chaos. The bloodthirsty contestants tore into each other, hacking, slashing, ripping. The air thickened with the scent of iron and sweat. A man's throat was slit open, spraying a hot mist of crimson as he gurgled on his own blood. Another had his ribs shattered with a hammer, his screams turning to wet, animalistic gasps as his lungs collapsed. Fingers were severed, limbs were hacked away, intestines spilled like serpents slithering onto the dirt. Vivian and Shania barely had time to react before a bloodied contestant came for them, his teeth bared in a snarl, wielding a jagged piece of broken metal. Shania moved first, ducking under his swing and driving her knife into his gut, twisting until she felt something rupture. His eyes bulged in agony, but before he could scream, Vivian grabbed his head and slammed it into the ground, the sharp edge of a rock splitting his skull open like an overripe fruit. The brutal frenzy lasted mere moments, but by the end, only one man remained standing, blood-drenched, trembling, the machete clenched in his shaking hands. His gaze snapped to Tyson, standing at the far end of the pit, an amused smirk curling his lips. Without hesitation, the lone survivor charged, desperation fueling his reckless attack. The machete arced through the air, aiming for Tyson's throat. But before the blade could meet flesh, Tyson moved, fast, impossibly fast. His jaws snapped forward, his teeth sinking into the steel as if it were nothing more than brittle bone. A sickening crunch rang out as he bit through the metal, snapping it in two. He spat the fragments onto the ground, blood and saliva dripping from his lips. The attacker stumbled back, wide-eyed, paralyzed with terror. Tyson lunged. His massive hand wrapped around the man's throat, lifting him off the ground with effortless ease. The poor soul thrashed, his fingernails clawing at Tyson's wrist, but it was like fighting against a god. Tyson opened his jaws wide and bit down, his teeth sinking into flesh and bone. The sound of cartilage snapping was drowned by the shrill, inhuman scream that followed. With a savage rip, Tyson tore the man's head clean from his shoulders. The spine dangled grotesquely from the gory stump, dripping thick, arterial blood onto the dirt. The body convulsed for a brief moment before slumping into the growing pool of carnage. The pit fell into horrified silence. Then, madness took over. Survivors surged forward, their fear morphing into blind panic. Some fought, desperate for a sliver of survival. Others turned to flee, but the guards stationed around the pit gunned them down like animals. Bullets tore through flesh, skulls exploded like shattered melons, and the dirt beneath them became a sea of gore. Xavier, Vivian, Aiken, and Edwin found themselves among the last standing, the metallic scent of blood clogging their senses. Edwin, bruised and battered, fought like a demon, his fists caving in skulls, his blade carving through throats. But it was not enough. Tyson reached him first. One moment Edwin was there, breathing, alive. The next, his head was gone, ripped from his shoulders in one brutal motion. His body swayed before collapsing, his lifeless hands still clenched into fists. Aiken staggered back, blood soaking his clothes. His chest heaved, his fingers tightening around the blade he had been given. His voice came out hoarse, raw. We're no match for him. Vivian's face was pale, her eyes darting toward Tyson's hulking form. We never were. The beast of a man took a step forward, his monstrous frame casting a suffocating shadow over them. His lips curled back in a grin, his teeth still stained with fresh blood. After a death wish, huh? His voice was deep, a rolling thunder of impending doom. He raised his hands, flexing his fingers, each one capable of snapping bones like twigs. "You will wish for a quick death." Weapons rained from the balcony, knives, axes, even firearms. But none of them held any illusions. Against Tyson, it would never be enough. The massacre was only beginning.